Hello, welcome everybody to your lesson on Unit 7.3, factoring. I know that a lot of you probably are pretty proficient at factoring, but I'll go through the details nevertheless, and we do have some harder problems which I'll show you at the end. Now, if the way I decide to teach you how to factoring doesn't work for you and you had a previous method that another teacher shared, feel free to use that method. The method I'm going to do is I'm going to pick the first term, the last term, and I'm going to factor them, and then I'm going to use guess and check to try to figure out the result. Now, first of all, what is factoring? Well, in numbers, factoring would be taking 10 and breaking it up into a multiplication problem 2 times 5. That's factoring with numbers, greatest common factors, etc. Factoring with polynomials is taking this trinomial, we call it because it has 3 terms, and breaking it up into 2 binomial factors. So the first spot is a v. The only thing that could go here is a v and a v, because according to FOIL, first, outers, inners, last, the first terms have to combine to this first term, and that can only be v. The last term is where I move to next. Well, the last term could be 10. Well, there's a couple possibilities. There's 1 and 10, or 2 and 5. How do you know? Well, I always like to just guess one of those combinations, 2 and 5, and then maybe list them. I always choose the ones that are closest together first, because those are most likely the answers. So I'm going to choose 2 and 5, and then I kind of know what my signs are going to be here, because I'll show you how I do that. I know that it's going to be a -2 and a -5, because then when I move to my outers and inners, that determines the signs, and if your 2 and 5 is correct, or if your 1 and 10 is correct. So I know the first, v and v, give me v squared. I know the last, 2 and 5, give me 10, and then I have to check my outers and my inners, outside, inside, to see if I can get a result of -7v. Well, my outers are is 5v. My inners is 2v, and the only way to get these to be a -7, because there's a negative there, is to have them both be negative. So that's the guess and check method. If you have the break up the middle method or any other method that worked for you from a previous teacher, feel free to go with it. But this is the way I like to factor. Second example, sometimes there is a leading coefficient there, 5. This then makes the problem harder. So I'm going to start with combinations that give me 5, so 5v and 1v. Fortunately, that's the only combination I could have. If that was a 6, you would have 2 and 3 and 1 and 6, and then you'd have to keep trying and trying and trying. Now 40 is a tough one. Now if you're good with your multiplication, you can kind of break it down. I like to start with the number 1. 1 times 40, that's a possibility. 2, does 2 go into 40? Yep, 2 and 20. 3 doesn't go into 40, 4 does. 4 times 10. I just like to count up. 5 times something is 40. 5 times 8. 6, no. 7, no. And then once I get to these two numbers that are close together, as soon as you get back to 8 again, you don't have to make another list. So I like to guess my possibilities. I'm going to try 5 and 8 first. I have no idea if that's correct, so I try 5 and 8. And then I always do my outers and inners check. The outers is 40, 5 times 8. The inners is 5. Can 40 and 5 be combined to get 30? No. Incorrect choice. Well, I tried 5 and 8. What about 8 and 5? Let's try that. The outers is 25. The inners is 8. 25 and 8. Can that be 30? No. All right, well, if you have an eraser, that might work, or you could just keep crossing them out, but I'm done with 5 and 8. So I'm going to then move on to 4 and 10. So let's try 4 and 10, or 10 and 4. The outers is 5 times 10, which is 50. The inners is 4 times 1, which is 4. That will never give me 30, no matter if one's negative or positive. So let's reverse them. Let's put the 10 over here. Let's put the 4 over here. I get outside 20, inside 10. 20 and 10. V's, of course, but I'm just looking at the numbers. 25 times 4 and 10. Hey, that can give me 30. I found it. So how do I get negative 30 if they're both negative? Now this gets really busy, so I'm going to rewrite it neater. 5v minus 10 and v minus 4. Double check. 5 times v is 5v squared. Good. Outers is negative 20 and negative 10, which gives me negative 30. Good. And then the last, negative times a negative is a positive 40. I did it. So this is the factored form. I would like you to factor out a common factor if you can, and a 5 comes out of that first parentheses there. So I'm going to pull out the 5. If I pull out a 5 from 5v, it's v. If I pull out a 5 from 10, it's 2. This is a v. And then here is my completely factored form. This will help us solve equations later. So that's example 2, a little harder one. And now we get to the second type of factoring we're going to study, and this is called grouping, factoring by grouping, and this is when you have 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. When you have 4 terms, you group the first 2 and group the last 2, and you pull out greatest common factors of the first 2 and the last 2. Treat them as 2 separate problems. I can pull out a 5 from 5 and 10, and then I can pull out 2 n's from n cubed and n squared. So I'm going to pull out a 5 and then 2 n's. I'm left with n minus 2, because pulling out a 5 from 10 leaves you with 2, and the 2 n's are pulled out. The second parentheses, I do a likewise thing, pull out something between 3 and 6, which is 3, and I'm left with n minus 2. So now, if you did it correctly, these two terms are the same, and they will be. So you basically merge these two into one, n minus 2, and you write the leftovers together, which are the things in front. 5n squared plus 3. And you're done. If I FOILed this, I would get my original problem. Now, if you want to know why that all works, because it's always interesting to know why, if you look at these two terms separate, term 1 and term 2, what is common between them is the n minus 2 and the n minus 2. So I essentially am pulling this out of both of these and put it in front, which is this term. And then when I pull out this factor, I'm left with this, goes there. And when I pull out this factor, I'm left with this, 3 goes there. But if you memorize the system, you won't have to really worry about why it works. It's just the way you factor by grouping. Factoring by grouping again, but this is a more challenging problem because you have x's and y's. Group the first two, group the second two. You do have to group the minus with the 15 if there's a minus sign. 12 and 28. Well, I know a 2 goes into 12 and 28, but does a 4? Yes. Anything higher than a 4? 6? No, I think it's a 4. So I'm going to pull out a 4x because there's an x in both. So 4x, I'm left with 4 times what is 12? 3. I pull out the x, I'm left with a y. Pull out a 4 from 28, I get 7. Subtract 7, and the x comes out. Second term, what greatest common factor do you have between 15 and 35? I believe the answer to that is 5. And we'll check our work in a second. And when you pull out a 5 from 15, you're left with a 3. And you pull out a 5 from 35, you're left with a 7. Now here's the tricky part. You do have a minus sign. So I want these things to be exactly the same. So I don't want the minus sign hanging out in the front. I need to pull that out with the 5. Now if I pull that out, I need to change all of these signs. This was a minus, now becomes a plus. And this one was a plus, now becomes a minus. And you can always check that by checking your parentheses. As with the last problem, these two combine into one. And the leftovers in front get combined. And there is factoring by grouping. Hope that helps. Thanks for listening. Have a good day.